All right, we are back into our session. So, Billy, if you want to go over your alternative subcommittee structure.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, and thanks everybody for giving me a minute to share this and for your consideration of it. So, just very brief. I don't think I will kind of walk through it in great detail unless somebody wants me to. But just a couple quick things to note. Number one is that the words in blue are the provisions of the NMHA that speak to the board's recommendations specifically. The words in black are the provisions of the NMHA that speak to the regulations that DORA is required to implement, and which the board is required to provide recommendations regarding. There is some overlap between some of the blue and black text, but I just wanted to be comprehensive and make sure that kind of everything got included in one spot. Another thing that I wanted to note in terms of the structure and the reason that I styled them the way that I did, in particular the services subcommittee, is that to me, a very, very critical thing that we're tasked with doing is defining the structure of kind of the regimen by which the medicines will be delivered. So I personally believe that is as important, if not more important, than the kind of chemical makeup of the substances themselves. And I also, this is a conversation for another day, but I think this is particularly important when it comes time to think about government and private insurance coverage programs contemplating covering these services, which I think is a really vital way to ensuring affordable and equitable access to them. So anyway, so that's one reason that I started with services. And I did include there the provisions that relate to communicating with the public about the safe and effective use of the medicine and other kind of public campaign components of the act, although I could certainly understand the possibility of separating those out because it does create a lot of work for that one particular committee. The other thing that I want to make sure that I note is that the provision at the very end relating to equity, which does include references to things like indigenous use, in my opinion, every subcommittee needs to prioritize that directive under the law. I think it will actually be less effective and less equitable if we have a separate subcommittee focused on those things that doesn't have kind of quote unquote jurisdiction over the actual operational components of the natural medicine services and program. So that's why it's not assigned to one subcommittee. It is something that I believe could be implicated for each subcommittee, and that members of each subcommittee need to prioritize consideration of the degree to which their decisions are equitable and creating equitable access to these medicines and services. I'll just say briefly, so the medicine subcommittee would focus on the natural medicine itself, its purity, its dosage, its the cultivation of it, etc. And then would be subcommittees relating to facilitators, and then health centers, which are the two. And this does also loosely follow the structure of the regulations that DORA is required to issue in terms of kind of the major sections of the Natural Medicine Health Act, separated out this way. The fourth subcommittee is dedicated to
Four is a healing center subcommittee.
Oh, thank you. Sorry. Thanks, Sam.
Yeah.
So
No problem.
Services, medicine, facilitator, healing center, then and access. And there's only a couple of bullets, but to me, this is not because it's simple or not a lot of work to be done to figure out, okay, we're kind of defining the services, we're licensing centers and facilitators to support people in accessing these medicines and their benefits. But how do we make sure that actually people across the state can get access? And affordability is a huge component of that. Also, health equity and things like addressing potential disparities, which will naturally rise in any healthcare program. We want to be critically mindful of that, et cetera. So this is about ensuring that having set up the program, that people are able to access it, including be able to afford it. And then I did separate out data as a separate subcommittee. I also think that this is critically important in terms of the precedent that we're setting here in Colorado. Of course, we all know that Oregon is doing work in this area as well, but the way that I'm looking at this is if we believe that these medicines have promise, then the work we're doing right now and going forward will be paving the way for other states and, frankly, people around the world to benefit from what these medicines have to offer. And in order to do that, I think we need to be collecting data about their benefits in obviously a way that honors all privacy and personal information. All that is clearly called out repeatedly in the act, and any recommendations that the subcommittee makes should honor those directives from the law. But that if we don't collect meaningful data about the experience of Colorado, then I think we have just whiffed on a massive opportunity to educate the rest of the country and the world about what these medicines can do. So that's enough of my little monologue. Thanks for listening. I'm happy to talk about it further.
I have a quick question. Will we get this in our email so we can reference them back?
Sure, we can definitely send this out to you. I think what we need to figure out here is, and Billy, I really appreciate your work on this. I think we need to, I don't know that things are much different. I think they might be organized a little differently, but in looking at the subcommittees that the director that we've put together for the director, I think those are the areas that the director needs the information to make her to make the rules, right? And I think she has a bunch of deliverables, which is all of those rules pursuant to the act. And I think those were the areas that she thought they're the areas that she needs the subcommittee's recommendations for, so that those rules can be made. And I'm wondering, I think, there are some things that I think are really important that are they have to be there. Harm reduction's one. We're a public protection agency, so that's definitely something that has to stay. And then I think having that subcommittee that just focuses on Indigenous and religious use is really important, given the climate and, just given the origin of these medicines. I think that it's incredibly important that we honor that use. So that being said, when we look at your organization, Billy, what do you guys think as members who, please, join in? What are your thoughts? How can we make sure the director gets what she needs and organize it, in a way to make sure that it makes sense to everyone?
It's Josh Goodwin here. I think just from a logistical perspective, I love the idea of, having Indigenous experts in every one of these subcommittees, but who's got time for that, right? And right now we've already got 3, and we're talking about 4-hour meetings every other week. And, I'm not an expert on, the Indigenous use of this. And so I don't know how many people we have on the board that fit that criteria, but do they even have time to sit on that many different committees versus sitting on one where they kind of look at each policy and screen it and say, okay, does this kind of fit what we need in the next? It could just be logistically tough.
Thank you. Well,
Karen, just to qualify, so the original subcommittees were designed by the director?
Yes, we worked with the director to make subcommittees to make sure that we could have the information and the experts that she needed to weigh in to make sure that she can, honor her charge in the Natural Medicine Health Act.
Sophia. Oh, Sophia, we can't hear you. I think we need to go to the audio settings, Sophia, and then adjust them. I'm gonna go to Skippy.
Hey all, I'm Skippy. First, I just want to say hi and thank you. It's really an honor and pleasure to be part of this group, and thank you to staff for putting so much together. I just wondered, Bill, thank you for this background work, which is really significant. I wondered, before commenting on this and sort of the broader framework that we're looking at with these subcommittees, if anybody else had also prepared any alterations, changes, amendments, so that I could consider those before dropping in. And if not, then I'll circle back.
This is Sophia. Can you hear me now? Yes?
We can hear you.
Okay, so I appreciated having the Indigenous and religious component added to all of the different sections, because I do feel that it's very relevant, considering that this is an Indigenous medicine that's being brought into the modern world. And contributions with regards, and I realize that time is of the essence here, and I actually cut back my employment hours so that I could dedicate more time to this over the next couple of years, because that's how important this is to me. And for example, I was assigned to 2 of the subcommittees, and I'm interested in 4 of them. One of the things is research. I'll give you an example of research that really needs to be considered. I did a culturally based care program and reached out to researchers in 2019. And some of the researchers were telling me that I couldn't follow through with my program, because they said, you're not going to know if it's the drums, you're not going to know if it's the rattles, you're not going to know what it is that, provides that outcome. And so I had to find culturally competent researchers to help measure the outcomes. And there are researchers like that at the University of New Mexico, at the University of Colorado. And so when we're talking about research, we do need that Indigenous and religious component in our research subcommittee. And then when you're talking about cultivation, I'll give you an example of cultivation. I recently visited the Pewaukee Pueblo in New Mexico, where seeds are kept. It's a seed bank, and plants like the mushroom is a sacred plant. And when you go visit that seed bank, this may not be important to everyone on this committee, but when you walk into that seed bank, you honor the walls of the earth, because it's in the cellar in the earth, and you honor the earth, and you honor the seeds, and you honor the medicine. And so the way that these plants are cultivated, the way that they are grown, harvested, all of this is very important to the Indigenous and religious components of this program. So I think it does touch on a lot of this. Maybe not all of the commercialized pieces will have the, will want the same thing, but me as an individual, I'm going to want to purchase plants or have access to plants that were produced in an Indigenous, holistic, religious way. So I think it touches on a lot of these different subcommittees, and we have to be aware of that moving forward. Thank you.
No, thank you, Sophia. Lundy?
I think for my feedback, I'm just going to provide a both and. I do think that equity needs to be considered in every subcommittee. That being said, I think it's essential to have a subcommittee where that is a primary consideration, because otherwise I have concern that it won't be considered as much of a priority. So I think I carry a similar kind of both and, but I do appreciate the director's centering of health equity for one of the subcommittees as part of their work. So that's just an additional add.
Dr. Goodwin?
Yeah,
Thank you, Lundy.
If I read this right, so all of the policy is going to flow through the equity subcommittee, right? So they're going to see all of it and be able to put input in it instead of attending each meeting. Is that right? I mean, instead of attending 6 different subcommittee meetings every time, they would, the other committees would put it together and then push it through that committee for their review. Is that kind of the idea?
Yeah, the full board will see all of the recommendations from all the subcommittees, and it will be submitted to everyone, as well as research materials and presentations and all that will be submitted to everyone, not just one group or one subcommittee as well. And it is this is very much multifaceted and broad in scope, and everything will essentially be touching everything, whether it's public health, health equity, indigenous religious use. It's all at play here together.
Yeah, and I like, just Lundy's thought of having a group that's just looking at that. When they get that policy and they're in that mindset and they're kind of scrubbing it, I think that's a great thing. So good job on putting that together. Thanks.
Billy?
Skip, you can go ahead if you'd like, and because I've already spoken, so I'd love to hear from you others before I say anything else.
Skippy?
I was going to say the same thing about, is it Katina? Is that who you? I don't see an R. Yeah, if you want to jump in first, I haven't heard from you as well.
Thank you, Skippy. Yeah, there's a couple of thoughts I have. The first is that, truthfully, I'm finding it hard a little bit to assess, or make any kind of comparison between, what was presented to us prior to the meeting and what the hard work that Billy's put in. Billy, very impressive, man, put into his analysis, which I think the logic of it really makes sense. Although I think for me, it is resonating that there are some elements, the harm reduction piece, for example, really swings through that we would want to consider adding if we went that approach. I also am, I guess this is actually a comment for the original list as well, is I think it shows up, at least it appears it shows up a little bit in Billy's structure, but the education and the public education component that needs to, I think, also flow through is probably a consideration that, each subcommittee is going to need to have, as well as the equity question, which I 100% agree with Billy's premise there, that that's something that needs to be taken into consideration for each subcommittee as they're working through the particular topics that are their mandate. For me personally, I'm hard pressed to know that there's the Billy's way is the better way, because I haven't had a chance to really digest.
Skippy, do you want to?
Thank you. Yeah, I do. Thank you for that. That was helpful. So the first thing I just wanted to weigh in on is, Billy, I love the suggestion of having that, the way I heard it, right, is having sort of the DEI lens in each element of the programming. I do think that's really critical. I'm not opposed to also having a standalone Indigenous area. My experience with these things, which will lead to the kind of broader question, and maybe it's more of a question for staff, or maybe it's more for open direction, is, parsing out the work is required, right? Because if we don't do that, we simply won't be able to untie the knot in a timely fashion, and it'll be very challenging. And yet these constituent parts need to speak together elegantly to work. Billy, just in your example, for instance, having data over here and healing centers over here, well, the healing center needs to think about the data collection, because that results in staffing choices and costing. And that, of course, then affects the DEI component, because now things have gotten more expensive, and have we priced out people who need this healing work? And so there's just sort of this natural tension that will always exist. And so my question for staff is, is what is the anticipated framework for information sharing between subcommittees? Is it just that subcommittees will bring back in regular meeting to the broader group for approval? Or is there a substrate that will allow sharing of threshold information to other subcommittees as they work through things between regular meetings? And for context, and I've sat through a lot of public meetings, you know, and this public meeting isn't that, and I don't want to prejudge how this group will work, but what I've seen is that there is a incentive unspoken in sort of the broader meeting to just defer and approve, because people don't want to be seen as being overly critical. They don't want to take up too much time. They don't want to redo the meeting. And so things tend to get approval without going back. And so with knowledge of that, I don't want us to get into that trap of having the subcommittees not speak to each other in an elegant way. So can staff maybe comment on that anticipated information flow between subcommittees and how that's intended to work?
So I think that's kind of a broad question, in that we're trying to figure out, one, how many subcommittees we have, two, how often are they going to meet? But as we have it set out, we have the subcommittee meetings bi-monthly. Is that right? Bi-weekly, sorry. And so we're going to be having 3 subcommittee meetings every week. And then we will have to fit in your regular meeting as well. So my question is, I think that the subcommittees could get together and work on some things. My question is, for you all, do you have the time to add that additional meeting in, because it will have to be open and noticed to the public? And it seems to me a better use of your time that occurs during your broader open, full board meeting, if you will. I think we can accommodate it however you need it. I think what I do think everybody needs to be super mindful of is just the time that this is going to take out of your days and what you're able to devote. I know all of you have said you're able to devote a considerable amount of time, but we just don't want to add a lot more meetings to your plate.
Wendy?
I just have a question. What's going to happen if we have to miss one of the meetings because we have something else? That's my biggest concern. If you're going to add a bunch of subcommittees and all of that, there are some of us that have pretty much 60-hour jobs on the other, so it's going to make it even tougher.
Yeah, I will say on that, we do have a suggested schedule that we will go over later, but we want to stick it within the 6 subcommittee framework for everyone's time. Ashley?
Thanks, Sam. I'll just point out that under whatever model you adopt subcommittees, there will be quorum expectations in order to hold the meeting. And so I think there's an understanding and an acknowledgement that not everyone's going to be able to make it to every subcommittee meeting that they get scheduled for, but it will be very important as we start talking about small numbers of individuals that you do your best to make it to those meetings, because if we lack quorum, then the meeting can't be held. And so we get off schedule. So regardless of the way the subcommittees are organized, if there's a 3-person subcommittee, 2 people will have to be there in order to make quorum. And so it's a majority of the number. So I'll point that out just to kind of give you the expectations around open meetings law and because of the fact that we follow parliamentary procedure, we'll need a quorum to act. So.
Billy, sorry, you.
Sure, thanks. Just two quick things, trying to be responsive to some of the things that I've heard. Number one is that I think in both constructs, and certainly speaking for myself in mine, everything that the board is required to consider, including things like harm reduction, is included. Everything is literally taken from the act and put in there. So I just wanted to note that just because there's not a subcommittee with that word, in the title, and of course we could rename the subcommittees. I really named them functionally, it's not a value judgment about, the word that's there is like the most important thing about what's going on with that subcommittee. It was just, to me, kind of like the common denominator that tied together the different things that the subcommittee would resolve. That's one thing, is that all these other kind of components that people are raising are in there. The reason that I did this, it's not that I love organizing subcommittees. It's that when I read the draft and I thought about myself serving on one of these subcommittees, I really wasn't sure what specific things that subcommittee would need to focus on and make recommendations by in 5.5 months. So that's kind of my main inspiration and motivation for presenting an alternative format where subcommittees can start meeting next week and know very clearly which elements of the law they are tasked with trying to come up with recommendations relating to, whereas at least for me, intuitively, it's not readily apparent in draft A, let's call it. And then the other point regarding equity in indigenous use, I'm also not opposed to having a separate subcommittee for that. I do wonder, and part of this is informed by, I peeked at what Oregon's done. It's okay, and I'm not an expert on what Oregon has done for those from Oregon who might be listening, but I believe they have an equity subcommittee, and I saw their recommendations. And just at my read, they do feel like they kind of float a field of like the actual, kind of, again, like operational, meat and potatoes of what the board has recommended. So I'm just fearful that that's where we'll wind up if we really dedicate that work to a subcommittee. And in terms of sequencing, we'll meet as a board, subcommittees will meet and start to develop ideas and recommendations. And then, are we suggesting that an equity and indigenous use subcommittee would then, review all the different subcommittees' work before we come back as a board? I just think in terms of the time frame and the logistics, but I hope I'm not being misunderstood, that I don't think equity and indigenous use is not like, probably the most critical kind of value oriented thing that this board needs to consider by where I'm steering with this. I just want to make sure that those values are embedded in kind of, seamlessly throughout the process. But again, we'll happily vote for creation of that kind of subcommittee. That's where the consensus lies.
Thank you, Billy, and seriously, thank you for sharing this document with the board. Katina?
Yeah, thank you. I think Billy, very insightful. It's actually my struggle with the Form A, as well as it seems it's not clear what it's tethered to within the ordinance. But my guess or hunch is that the staff actually did think through that part. It's just maybe not expressed or communicated in the documents that we are looking at. I think that when I look at, I know we haven't adopted these yet, but right, every subcommittee ideally is going to have like the guidelines, the specific authority it has, which is most likely derived right from the statute. That I guess I'm just optimistic that we could get to a place where there's a clear understanding for each subcommittee, exactly what they're supposed to be working on, and everyone knows that. And then we have some clear guidelines around, we know where the lines between one subcommittee and another exist, so that that's also sort of top of mind, right, with regard to the committee's work. That as if you're on the Public Health and Health Equity Committee, you're also mindful of the fact that when you're talking about a particular issue, that if it falls within your guidelines or within your framework, that there's another subcommittee that's looking at this issue from some other angle that you need to be making sure you're considering. Like, I feel like we could have those lines drawn for us and have it be clearer. And regardless, I think, frankly, of whichever structure we use, but that's my 2 cents on the overlap issue, because yeah, I'm sure that jumped off the page for everyone, and
Sure.
my sense is that it's workable.
Sure. So I think for each subcommittee, there are things that need to be addressed. They just haven't been finalized because I guess in our minds as staff, we don't want to put the cart before the horse. We need to figure out what the subcommittees are and then make sure that the things that each subcommittee needs to address are crafted for that committee, if that makes sense. And that we want to minimize overlap to the extent we can, because we have so much work to get done. And I think that's, the main concern. Also wanting just to make sure that, the director is the person who's charged with doing this, and the advisory committee is here to advise the director. So I want to just make sure that, as I'm sitting here, I'm not the director, right? I'm here today to serve as chair until we get a chair, but just making sure that we are mindful that we all need to make sure that she has what she needs to carry out her charge. So I think what I'm going to do is call for a vote and then call for a motion, and then we can have more discussion once we call for that motion. So I'm going to call for a motion to adopt the subcommittees as proposed by the director.
So moved, Sue Sisley.
Okay. Can I have a second?
I will second that, Wendy Buxton Andrade.
Thank you. Discussion?
I have a question, Karen, as far as this is in the context of discussion. It's just, I'm wondering if someone on the staff could, kind of confirm my assumption that the lines can be drawn to the ordinance and that we're comfortable and confident that we, actually captured the
Yes.
different requirements.
Yes, I can confirm that for you.
Will we have that information before we meet as subcommittees?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Again,
Josh Goodwin.
yeah, I'm a little, this is kind of a basic question, but I'm a little unclear on the mechanics of actually writing these things down in the language, right? Like who writes that? And if it's us, do we have to do that only when we're chatting on these Zoom sessions, or do we write, do we work out on it personally and then discuss it, during the meeting? Does that make sense? I guess I just don't understand how that works.
Okay, ask again, please.
Just the mechanics of the actual language, the parts of the rules that these subcommittees are going to be producing. Who actually writes out those pages and lines of language? And then if it's us, do we have to only work on that when we're together in Zoom meetings, or do we work on it individually, send it, it comes out, and then we discuss? Does that make sense? I'm just trying to figure out what the flow is going to look like.
Sure. Typically what will happen is once you, as a subcommittee, will start, getting your ideas together, there's going to be staff present at all of your meetings. There'll be an attorney general, there will be board staff. Board staff will start making the document, right? Typically what we will do in these types of meetings is we put it up on the board. We type while you're talking. You're like, no, I want it to say this. I want it to do differently. Yes, people can do some work on their own and bring it to the committee, but typically we do the majority of the work during the subcommittee meetings. Does that help?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So seeing no further hands, no further discussion, then I am going to ask for a vote. All in favor of adopting the director's subcommittees as set forth on the slide on the screen, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, nay.
Nay.
Okay.
Abstain.
The motion carries.
Abstain.
And an abstention. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm gonna abstain as well.
Okay. I'm just recording for the minutes. Okay. All right. So I think the next thing we need to look at then is the assignments. So Kathy, do you want to go to that page? There we go.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I just wonder, I so appreciate Billy, you taking that intense amount of time to put that together. It was incredibly thoughtful. And I think I'm always mindful of, like, we train people how to treat us. And I just want to, like, recognize you for doing that, because I think it's a huge value. And I hope that I and other board members can follow in your footsteps in, like, really taking the time to bring things forward and not just feeling like things are going to get shut down. And so I wonder, and it just, kind of came up fast. So it's, like, hard to take it all in the moment. But I wonder if there's an opportunity for Billy to work with staff, or if it would be appropriate just on the back end to make sure that some of his ideas and thoughts around getting that degree of specificity back to the subcommittees make it to those committees in between now and then.
Absolutely. And I appreciate that, Skippy. And to the extent that I did not seem appreciative, I apologize for that, because we're incredibly appreciative of all the work that you do, and was very interested in what Billy had proposed. And I think when we look at the specific directives for each committee, we will definitely look to his document and are happy to have him join in that conversation. So thank you, Skippy.
Yeah, if the board would. And please don't read into my comments any criticism of you or the process.
No.
That wasn't intended. I'm just having flashbacks to, like, my first council meeting when I brought this big affordable housing plan in, and everyone kind of looked at me sideways and moved on. And I just felt like, what? So I just wanted to make sure he wasn't feeling that way.
No, I appreciate you. And I always appreciate when people call that out, because sometimes I'm just all business trying to move forward. So I appreciate it. Dr. Pincola Estes Reyes.
Thank you. In my experience, no group is monolithic. Often the more people added to a group, the better in one way. It takes time, of course, the more people. But also, I guess my question is this. In a model that's used in the religious and indigenous groups I belong to, they're not assigned. They're brought forward. They're called in a certain way to participate in a certain way. And I'm in agreement with that. It's best for my family and many other families to walk in three worlds: the world of our tribal group, our ethnic group, our racial group. And it's good to walk in the world of mystery and religiosity and spirituality. Those are two different worlds. And it's also good to work and walk in the overculture, which is what we're doing right now. The overculture has a set of rules, ideas, policies, regulations that don't necessarily conform to tribal, ethnic, racial familias, families. That doesn't necessarily conform in any way to the mystery or the mystical. So, and yet, many of us come from those three worlds to this particular process of medicines given from our point of view by Creator, not by men, restricted by humans, but given to us fully with full heart. And I'm just concerned, and that's where my question's going, is how will we be able to, in a way, bless and consecrate what we're bringing as our attitude, as our thought, as our idea, as our inquiry, as our everything, to all of these aspects, because every single one of the aspects that are now assigned to subcommittees are things that I feel pretty strongly most are interested in having a say-so in. And the idea that we might not hear from the other parts of the body, so that we're walking one-legged, one-armed, one-sidedly. Again, my question is in that area. How will we bring what we are and why we've been chosen to this to help inestimable others in terms of access, in terms of freedom to open clinics, for instance, regardless of race, nationality, religion? How will we keep children, adults, elders, people who are not well mentally, all right, and say, how will we do all that if we don't hear each other? I feel like I could have a long dinner with every single one of you for weeks at a time until the day I die. And I would never run out of interest in what you have to say. So I'm going to try to coalesce my question. If we break into compartments, like you take a body apart, and this is a leg, and this is an arm, and this is a head, and this is a shoulder, and so on, at what point over time do we put the body back together on a regular basis so we can see what actually is happening? Okay, I rest.
Okay, so I think what you're asking me, I want to make sure is, I think you're saying if we break into subcommittees, we're taking the body apart, and then you're asking, when do we all get back together? And I think that is the full board meetings. So people will meet with their subcommittees, but then we will all come back as a full board meeting, and we will talk about the work in the subcommittees. So each person on the board knows what's happening in each subcommittee, so that you guys can then be whole and understand what's going on. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it does. I'm thinking more at a maybe less, how do I want to say? I'm thinking at a pragmatic level that includes the mystical, includes the ethnic and the racial and the background, because we are so varied, just the 15 of us who are here, let alone all the other hundreds and thousands of people who have a stake in all of this. And they don't all agree with each other. They are a very broad spectrum of thought, idea, creativity, and need, I might mention. So I'm just trying to think of how this is going to be oriented toward honoring the fact that we're talking about medicine that are given to all of us since the beginning of time. And regulation, you're right, certainly has its rules, has its sidewalls, has its boundaries. That's true. But I also don't know that taking the body apart so that each part of the body can't hear the other part except in a report once a month at a meeting is really, I hate to use the word holistic, but I'm going to use it, holistic way to proceed. One of the gravest concerns I have is that throughout the entire planet of Earth, there are people who carry this medicine. They are not identified by indigenous, they're not identified by tribe, they're not identified by race. They live their lives with this medicine grown in their grandmothers and their grandfathers and their great-grandmothers and great-grandfathers, place where there's any dirt that's fertile. And they've done so for centuries. And it's not a matter, I don't think, of us bringing to the world, but taking back from the world what belongs to all of us. And in that context, and please forgive me because I know I probably am belaboring the point, is there any way for us to proceed in a cohesive manner that honors that idea? Because you mentioned DEI, diversity, equity, and so forth. There's one other element to it, and it's coming up from the young people, and it's belonging, welcoming, being not transactional, but relational. And that's what I would hope for our board. And I'm not the queen of anything, trust me. But I would like our board to be relational, to take into account that every single person here, I'm looking at your names, your given names, and I'm seeing your Teutonic tribes. I'm seeing your Irish Gaelic roots. I'm seeing your Latino roots in Mexico from the Mexicas and the Cholulans and the Zacatecans. And I'm wondering, could we somehow be together some small way like that, relationally? Could we be together and decide all these things in a way that actually honors the whole intent of decriminalization of something given by greater? I'm going to stop in part because I feel I'm going on and on, but that is my deepest wish, is that this be relational.
No, thank you so much, Dr. Estes. I mean, I think you really hit it on the head. I think this is, very sensitive. It needs to move all together, uniform. And I mean, within the construct that we have of the agency and state government, right? We have the subcommittees and we have the monthly board meeting. In that essence, I think there are times where we can do where the board can decide and the chair can decide to do joint subcommittees if needed on specific topics, which I think will have to happen. And I think as we move forward, we really need to take that into consideration. I just want to thank you. Thank you for that comment. Karen?
So listening, hearing Dr. Estes, I know it's hard to break into these subcommittees and do work separately. And unfortunately, we just have this very short timeline. And so what I want to make sure, one thing I heard from Dr. Estes was, people feel like they come from a certain place or they're chosen or they're drawn to things. And that's why when we decided who could go to each committee, we were just trying to get a jump start on. If you are looking at these committees and you think that you fit somewhere differently or you're called to something different, that's what we'd like for you to discuss here so that we can move these assignments around so people are working on issues that they feel passionately about. I know that some of you had some thoughts, and so I just would like to have those discussed here in open session. Sophia?
Sophia, you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Yeah.
Based on what Dr. E shared and what other people have said is I put something in the notes about being part of 3 committees, but then if the meetings are made public and we all know when the meetings are being held by the subcommittees, if I could join in, for example, I don't need to be on the subcommittee that is working on research, but if I can have access to that committee as a board member and then contribute what I do know about what I've experienced, some of the things that have prevented whole systems research from taking place because some people are not aware of Indigenous competency research that is out there, and that some of the larger universities and some of the Indigenous peoples on the reservations and the Pueblos are doing this research themselves. And who better would know how to research the Indigenous or people of color than the Indigenous and people of color? So that voice should be heard. It's like uplifting the silent voices. So we have access to that, correct? And we can contribute to all of those subcommittees?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I was just going to say that board members, right, will be able to participate in other subcommittees that they are not assigned in, right? But as non-voting participants, and may be able to provide feedback and guidance and materials as well as that they're considering and want that subcommittee to consider as well.
Okay, thank you.
Skippy? Yeah, there we go. Sorry.
I'm sorry, I pressed the wrong Zoom button. I just wanted to thank Dr. Estes for your comments. I couldn't agree more with the value, I think, that's often overlooked in public meetings of bringing the humans forward. I think of, and again, this is not intended as a criticism, but we are almost, we're 2.5 hours into this meeting. We haven't done introductions yet, right? Who are we working with? Why are we here? And so what I really heard is finding structural opportunities to bring humanity into the process holistically. And I think that's really valuable. And whether that just looks like a simple 10-minute item in each agenda of the subcommittee for open discussion or sharing, whether that looks like a 30-second grounding exercise or intention setting that is appropriate and desired by those subcommittee members, but something to draw us together, especially we're in the digital space, I think is very much in honoring of the group, the process, and the medicines. And so I just wanted to celebrate that and suggest some pragmatic ways to get that into a more efficient schedule, which we also need to be successful.
I think, Billy, you had your hand raised first, then we'll go to Sue and then Josh.
Yeah, I just wanted to raise, thank you. In the context of deciding who's going to be on which subcommittees, the degree to which there was eye given to the balance of the number of people on a subcommittee, I was just kind of quickly tallying the ones that I'm going to be on. Partly, I was just curious who else is going to be on it. And there are 11 people assigned to the Public Health and Health Equity Subcommittee, if I'm looking at it correctly, and that feels a bit heavy. It's also incongruent with what the bylaws say in terms of having 3, 5, or 7. So I thought we might want to just pause and quickly visit it from that lens before we finalize the assignments.
Yeah, and we did want to go into this, based off of everyone's application and their qualifications. And I'm sure I left off quite a few subcommittees on each person that would apply to them. So these are not 100% confirmed, right? And if you do have an interest, and maybe if you have one on here that you would prefer not to have and would like to have something else, we want to use this time to discuss that. This is just kind of what we think might fit at the moment. Sue?
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate whatever the applause for Dr. E's comments. I just think what she said was so crucial, and the way I'm going to handle it is just I'm going to try to attend all of them whenever I can, because I care about all these topics, and I know we all do. So I think that's the best approach. Like everybody's saying, the timeline we're dealing with is so short, and we got to knock this out. So I'm just going to attempt to achieve the unity that Dr. E is describing, that we should be aspiring to, by trying to attend as many as possible and learning what everybody's talking about.
Thank you, Sue. Dr. Goodwin, Josh. Oh, sorry, Josh, you're on mute.
Yeah, I did it too, right? We're all going to do it once. It's just part of the ritual. I like Dr. Estes's comment about sitting down for dinner, right? I just love that idea. I used to be a counter-espionage case officer, and I worked in 40 countries. And you break cultural barriers faster by sharing meals together. You get to know each other better. There's like a social component there. And I think that's what she's talking about. And I'm just curious. I know we can't do that all the time, right? I get it. But can we every now and then get together, have dinner together, have one of these meetings in person, as long as we're broadcasting it to the world to see? I mean, is that something that we can do every now and then? I'm just curious.
Yay.
I think we can definitely have the meetings in person and broadcast it for sure. And the as far as the dinner thing, I will leave that to our legal counsel to advise. It would have to be a noticed meeting, remember, because we would invariably talk about board business. Ashley?
Well, we could get to know each other without talking board business.
You could, but and sorry, can you all hear me? I am all for scheduling a meeting for people to get to know each other, assuming that falls within Dora's kind of scope. I think pre-pandemic, we all boards met in person. We didn't have a remote option. I think one of the beautiful things about a remote option is that it's actually inclusive for our friends across the state, and they can then participate more fully and more easily, and so the meeting's more accessible. But we've learned how to do hybrid meetings, and if there is a space that gets organized and available for that, from a legal standpoint, there's no barrier to that. We certainly could do that.
Great, thank you so much.
Awesome. Okay, Skippy?
I'll shut up eventually. It's just moving into the suggested appointments. I'm sorry. I wasn't actually, I didn't realize it was 11 on public health and equity, but I was going to suggest taking myself off of that anyways. And so given that we're over the number, I would do that. I'm interested in joining the products research and data team. I think I can contribute quite a bit there and have a particularly interested and incisive mind for the measurement and quantification of these efforts over time and how that informs the rest of the movements across the world. So if it's possible to swap and everyone's in agreement, I'd love to do that. And then my question, which is really a question, is the Indigenous and religious use. I mean, I'm honored to be considered for that. I find it to be deeply important. I question my subject matter expertise. I'm not from an Indigenous community. Although I grew up in a Jewish bilingual school, I wouldn't consider myself religious. So I'm happy to give my time, but I kind of wonder if I'm the right person for that.
Okay. We can take you off if you.
I think it's
I'm not requesting to be off. I'm more like wondering what you thought I could bring to it so that I have a scope. And then I also want to ask the others who are on it if you guys think it would be worthwhile to be on it. I don't want to suck oxygen out of a room without deep knowledge of what we're talking about.
I think one of the things that you bring to the group is your geographic diversity. And I think that that's something that was considered when making assignments.
Skippy, it's more than that. You come from a group of people who have been hounded, murdered, ethnically cleansed. It is in your antepasados and your ancianos, your ancestors and the people who have walked on. You have nothing that would be valuable, I think.
I can do it, but I don't think you're going to be happy.
So I would just say that to you, that you'll bring your own people and their experience to this. The thing is, Indigenous is an odd misnomer in a way. People who are Euro-American are Indigenous to their own land. That means that people of all colors, all the way from light colored sand, all the way to blackest purple black, are people of color. That everyone is included. And so I will really love to hear you there. How to view from your ancestral heritage, and you'll learn more probably about your ancestral heritage as we go along also.
I intuit that you are correct, and I will seemingly follow your lead anyway.